Beyond I am this. The Buddha described 10 specific bonds that keep you cycling in suffering. They don't all drop at once. They drop in a specific sequence, in 4 stages, each one leaving you lighter, clearer, closer to the end of the road. Tonight, what each stage costs, and what it frees. If you've ever wondered whether this path is actually going somewhere, whether there are waypoints between here and full liberation, tonight, there are. Most people who encounter Buddhism assume you're either enlightened or you're not. That awakening is some distant, total transformation reserved for monks and saints. The Buddha said something different. He said there are 4 stages. He said the first stage, the one that makes the rest inevitable, may be closer to your reach than you think. And he described it with the precision of a cartographer mapping the territory he had walked himself. Tonight, the map, not as a checklist to pursue, not as a ladder to climb, as what the path actually does to a person who is doing the work. Chapter 1. When most people in the West first encounter Buddhism, they encounter it through a binary. Either you are enlightened, the way a Buddha is enlightened, the way the great masters are said to be enlightened, or you are not. Enlightenment is a single, total event, a door that opens or stays closed. And because that event seems so far away, so impossibly distant from where most of us actually live, the path itself starts to feel theoretical. Something other people might do, not something you might be on. This binary is not what the Buddha taught. The binary has a history. It comes, in part, from how the Western imagination has absorbed Buddhism over the past century. From the flash of light stories of Zen Satori, from the popular image of the meditator sitting silently for years and then, in one transcendent moment, breaking through into permanent illumination. From the assumption that what counts is the dramatic event, the lightning strike, and everything else is just preparation. Useful, perhaps, but not really the thing. The thing happens when it happens all at once, or not at all. This picture is not entirely wrong. It captures something, but it has flattened, in translation, a much more carefully articulated structure that the Buddha himself described in detail. A structure with stages, a structure with conditions, a structure that, far from being all or nothing, was specifically designed to give practitioners a way to recognize where the path leads and to know that it leads somewhere, even when the destination is still far ahead. In the discourses again and again, in dozens of suttas across all 5 collections, the Buddha described the path of awakening as a path with stages. Not one event but 4. Not a door, but a sequence of doors. The Pali tradition names them Sotapanna, the stream enterer; Sakadagam, the once returner; Anagam, the non-returner; Arahant, the one who has completed the work. 4 stages. 4 moments in which something that was binding falls away and does not return. We are going to talk about all 4 tonight, but we are going to focus most carefully on the first, because the first is the one that the Buddha said was within reach for ordinary householders in this life, doing this practice. Not after lifetimes of monastic discipline, now, here, with the conditions you can actually develop. What gets dropped at each stage? The Buddha named 10 things. He called them the samyojana, the fetters, bonds, chains, the specific cognitive and emotional structures that keep a being cycling. 10 of them, 5 lower, 5 higher, 5 that bind to the world of the senses, 5 that bind to even the subtler states of being. Each stage of awakening corresponds to a specific set of fetters that drop, and once they drop, they do not come back. Stream entry, 3 fetters fall, once returning. Those 3 are gone, and 2 more are weakened. Non-return. 5 fetters are completely cut. Arahantship. All 10 are uprooted entirely. That is the map. Stated that simply, it can sound like a checklist. As if you might tick off fetter number 1, then fetter number 2, and so on, until you arrive. The Buddha was extraordinarily careful about this. The stages are not a checklist to pursue. They are what the path produces. You do not aim at stream entry. You develop the conditions, verified confidence, ethical virtue, the practice of close attention. And at some point, in the depth of that practice, something happens that you did not aim at, something you could not have engineered. And after it happens, you are different in a specific way. You may remember from earlier in this catalogue, the diagnosis of dukkha, the first noble truth, the fundamental description of the human predicament, that there is something unsatisfactory at the very root of conditioned experience. You may remember the description of nibbana, the destination, the cessation, the unconditioned. And you may remember the practice, satipaṭṭhāna, the 4 establishings of mindfulness, the discipline that the Buddha taught as the direct path. Tonight, what happens between the practice and the destination? Tonight, the waypoints, what the path looks like in the territory you actually walk through, on the way from where you are to where the path goes. Because here is what the Buddha kept saying, in sutta after sutta, with a kind of quiet insistence. This path is not infinite. It has structure. It has shape. It produces specific, recognizable, irreversible results. And the first of those results, the first time something falls away and does not come back, is closer than the binary assumption would lead you to believe. What does this look like, lived from the inside? The canonical descriptions are surprisingly understated. A stream enterer does not glow, does not levitate, does not suddenly possess powers. The stream enterer, the Buddha said, has a certain quality of confidence that does not waver, a certain steadiness of orientation, a certain release from the kinds of fear that haunt ordinary minds, particularly the fear of falling into the lower realms after death. The change is internal, structural, often invisible to others, but it is real, and it does not undo itself. There is one thing we need to say before we go further. A warning, really. You will be tempted, as we describe these stages, to ask yourself whether you have reached any of them, whether the description of stream entry matches anything in your experience, whether you have, perhaps without knowing it, already crossed a threshold. This is a natural thing to wonder, and it is also the thing the Buddha most carefully warned against. The self that tracks its own progress is the same self that the path is designed to dissolve. Tonight is not for measurement, it is for orientation. The point of the map is not to mark your position on it. The point of the map is to know that the territory is real, and that the practice you do, when you do it, is producing something. Even when you cannot see it produce anything. We will come back to this at the end. For now, let us begin where the Buddha himself began, with what falls away first. Chapter 2. The Pali word samyojana is usually translated as fetter, a bond, something that ties. The image is precise. The Buddha was not describing abstract obstacles or vague hindrances. He was describing specific structures, cognitive, emotional, motivational, that bind a being to continued cycling in dissatisfaction. There are 10 of them. In one of the clearest enumerations, in the Anguttara Nikaya, the 10th chapter, the 13th discourse, AN 10.13, the Buddha lists them all. 5 are called the lower fetters, They bind to the realm of the senses, the world we live in moment by moment. 5 are called the higher fetters. They bind even to the subtle states of meditative absorption, to the very sense of being a someone who has experiences. Let us walk through them. The first fetter is Sakkāyadiṭṭhi, self-identity view. The cognitive position that the aggregates, the body, the feelings, the perceptions, the mental formations, the moments of consciousness, that these are, contain, or belong to a self. In the Majjhima Nikaya, in the 44th discourse, MN 44, the Buddha describes this view in 20 forms. Regarding the body, there is the view that the body is self, the view that self owns the body, the view that the body is in self, the view that self is in the body. 4 views regarding each of the 5 aggregates. 20 ways to be wrong about who you are. A note on language. The label often given to this enumeration, the 20 kinds of self-identity view, is commentarial. It is a useful organizing label that the later tradition supplied. The canon gives you the 20-fold content, but it does not give you that compact label. What the canon does give you is the structure. 4 positions, 5 aggregates, 20 possible misidentifications. Stream entry begins by releasing all 20. The second fetter is Vicikicchā, uncertainty, doubt. Not in the casual sense of intellectual hesitation, but in the specific sense of being unsure whether the path actually leads where it says it leads. Doubt about the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. Doubt about whether the practice is real, whether awakening is possible, whether there is a there to get to. This kind of doubt paralyzes practice. It saps energy. And at stream entry, it falls away, not because the practitioner has been persuaded, but because they have seen. The third fetter is sīlabbata-parāmāsa, grasping at habits and practices, holding on to rituals and observances as ends in themselves, believing that the right ceremonies, the right external forms, the right outward conduct, performed correctly, will produce liberation. The Buddha said, "It is not the form that liberates, it is what the form produces in the heart." You may remember from earlier in this catalogue the description of kāma, intentional action. What matters is the intention, the orientation, the inner movement, not the outer choreography. Stream entry releases this confusion. These are the 3 that drop at stream entry. The view of self, the doubt about the path, the grasping at form. Now, before we go further, we need to stop, because there is a question hidden inside the first fetter, and unless we answer it carefully, everything that follows will be misunderstood. The question is this: if stream entry releases self-identity view, does that mean the stream enterer has fully realized anatta, not self? Has the stream enterer experienced, in the deepest sense, the absence of self? The answer, in the canon, is precise, and it is not what most modern readers assume. Let me tell you the story. In the Samyutta Nikaya, in the 22nd chapter, the 89th discourse, the Khemmaka Sutta, SN 22.89, there is a story about a monk. The monk's name is Khemmaka. He is ill. He is, in fact, close to death, lying in his sickbed at the jujube tree park near Kosambu. A group of senior monks, elders, are staying nearby. They send a younger monk, Dasaka, to ask after Khemmaka's health. Dasaka goes to Khemmaka and asks, "How are you bearing up?" Khemmaka answers, "I am not bearing up. The pains are not subsiding. They are increasing. I am not well." Dasaka returns to the elders. The elders send him back with a question. "Khemmaka," they say, "the Buddha has spoken of 5 clinging aggregates, form, feeling, perception, formations, consciousness. Do you, friend Kemaka, regard any of these as self or as belonging to self? Kemaka considers. He answers, no, I do not regard any of the 5 clinging aggregates as self or as belonging to self. Dasaka takes this answer back. The elders draw a conclusion. Then Kemaka must be an arahant. He has uprooted the sense of self entirely. He has completed the work. But when Dasaka returns to Kemaka with this conclusion, Kemaka stops him. He says, I do not regard any of the 5 clinging aggregates as self or as belonging to self. And yet I am not an arahant. There still lingers in me, with regard to these 5 clinging aggregates, a residual conceit I am, a residual desire I am, a residual underlying tendency I am. It has not been fully obliterated. Dasaka does not understand. He takes this message back. The elders do not understand either. They send him a 3rd time, asking Kemaka to explain. And Kemaka, sick, in pain, close to death, explains. He says, it is like the scent of a flower. If someone were to say that the scent belonged to the petals, or to the color, or to the pollen, they would be wrong. The scent belongs to the flower as a whole. In the same way, there is no fixed self in any of the 5 aggregates. And yet, with regard to the 5 clinging aggregates, there lingers a residual sense. I am, a trace, a subtle, persistent feeling. Not I am this, not the gross identification with the aggregates. Just I am. A whisper, a tone underneath. He continues. He says, it is like a cloth that has been washed many times. Even when most of the stains are gone, even when the cloth appears clean, a faint smell of the cleansing agents lingers. To remove that final trace, the cloth must be aired further. In the same way, a practitioner who has abandoned the lower fetters may still have, lingering in regard to the 5 clinging aggregates, this faint residual I am. It is uprooted only by continued contemplation of the arising and the passing of those aggregates, continued seeing, continued attention, until the residual trace is fully obliterated. The Kemaka Sutta records that, by the end of this exchange, Kemaka explaining the 60 senior monks listening, both Kemaka and the elders attained full liberation. But the point of the story, for our purposes tonight, is not the ending. The point is the precision of Kemaka's self-diagnosis. He had abandoned the lower fetters. He no longer regarded any of the 5 aggregates as self. The view was gone. The cognitive position was gone. And yet, there lingered something. Not a view, something subtler, a feeling, a sense. I am. Not I am this, just I am. And he knew precisely that this was what remained. This is the canonical answer to the question we asked a moment ago. Stream entry removes self-identity view, the cognitive position that the aggregates are, contain, or belong to a self. It does not, in that moment, uproot the deepest residual sense of I am. That residual sense, what the tradition calls asmimana, the I am conceit, is a subtler fetter, the 8th on the list. Mana, conceit, and it is uprooted only at the very end. At arahantship, the view goes first, the sense goes last, and the practitioner who has dropped the view but not yet uprooted the sense is, the Buddha says, precisely a stream enterer, or a once returner, or a non-returner. They are real, they are recognizable, they are not arahants. And the path between them and arahantship is the path of continued contemplation, continued seeing, continued attention to the arising and the passing of what is. Now, before we move to the rest of the fetters, we must say one more thing about anatta. 2 of the greatest modern translators of the Pali Canon, Thanissaro Bhikkhu and Bhikkhu Bodhi, read this teaching in subtly different ways. Both are working from the same canonical text. Both have spent decades with the suttas. They agree on what falls away at stream entry. They disagree on what that falling away reveals about the nature of the self. Thanissaro Bhikkhu, in the Thai forest tradition, argues that anatta, not self, is what he calls a strategic perception, a tool, a mode of attention to be deployed in dismantling clinging. He points to discourses like the Ananda Sutta, SN 44.10, where the wanderer Vicikicchā asks the Buddha directly, "Is there a self? Is there no self?" And the Buddha refuses to answer either way. Thanissaro reads this as evidence that there is no self is not a position the Buddha taught. The teaching of not self is a strategy of disidentification, not an ontological claim. Sakkāyadiṭṭhi is abandoned in Thanissaro's reading when the practitioner ceases to hold any self-view as a mode of clinging. It is not replaced by the opposite belief. Bhikkhu Bodhi, working from the same text, reads the structure of the teaching as carrying ontological implication. The statement, Sabbe Dhamma Anatta, all phenomena are not self, taken together with the broader sweep of the canon, precludes any permanent, independent, transcendent self. The teaching is both pragmatic, yes, but also a description of how things are. Both the function and the implication are real. This is a genuine disagreement among careful scholars who have devoted their lives to these texts. Tonight, we are not adjudicating it. We are noting that it exists, and we are noting that the Buddha himself, when asked the question directly, declined to answer, which is, in itself, perhaps the deepest possible answer. What stream entry releases is the view. What stream entry does not, in that moment, complete is the full realization of what the absence of that view implies. That is the work of the path that remains. We must keep moving. Let us return to the fetters. The fourth and fifth lower fetters are kāma-rāga and byāpāda, sensual passion and ill will, the pull toward pleasant experience, the push against unpleasant experience, the two great motors of tanha, craving, that you have encountered before in the description of why more never satisfies, in the analysis of dependent origination. The Buddha said these two fetters are not cut at stream entry. They are weakened at once returning, and they are completely cut at non-return. Their removal is a long arc. The stream enterer still feels desire. The stream enterer still has moments of aversion, but the underlying pull has lost its grip on the deepest level of who they take themselves to be. The hooks no longer hook the same way. The fifth fetter, ill will, has its specific antidote. You have encountered it. The cultivation of metta, goodwill, loving kindness, not as a mood, as a practice. Repeated, sustained, applied. And here we need to be careful, because the canon is precise. In the Anguttara Nikāya, the fourth chapter, the 126th discourse, AN 4.126, the Buddha describes the conditions for non-return. He says, the practitioner who develops loving kindness and who also brings insight to bear on the very state that loving kindness produces, that practitioner is capable of non-return. The combination is what matters. Loving kindness alone, without insight, produces a beautiful but still samsaric outcome. Rebirth in a Brahma world, still inside the cycle. The combination of loving kindness samadhi and insight into the conditioned nature of that state is what cuts the fifth fetter at its root. Now, the upper five fetters, the ones that bind not to the realm of the senses, but to the subtlest states. The sixth, rupa-rāga, passion for form, the pull toward refined material existence, the world of the form realm jhanas, the most beautiful states a meditator can reach. The seventh, arupa-rāga, passion for the formless, the pull toward even subtler states, the formless absorptions, states so refined that ordinary description fails them. The eighth, mana, conceit. And here we must be careful, because this fetter is the one that gives the video its title, and it is the one most often misunderstood. The word conceit in English suggests vanity, pride, thinking too highly of oneself. The Pali word mana includes that, but goes far deeper. At the surface level, mana is comparison. Thinking I am better, thinking I am worse, thinking I am the same. The threefold conceit, as the canon names it. Any positioning of oneself relative to others. But beneath that surface, at the deepest level, mana is something subtler still. It is the residual sense I am, the same residual sense Kamaka described from his sickbed. The whisper underneath everything, the tone that persists even when self-identity view has been thoroughly dismantled, even when no aggregate is taken as self, even when comparisons have grown thin and rare. There is still, somewhere, the trace of a center, a here from which experiencing is happening, a point of reference that has not yet quite let go. The title of this video says it, Beyond I Am This. The stream enterer has, in a real sense, moved beyond I am this. The aggregates are no longer mistaken for self, but the deeper move beyond I am simply is the work of the path that remains. That move is completed only at arahantship. Mana is what stands between the stream enterer and the arahant. It is the most patient fetter. It survives the longest. The ninth, uddhaka. Restlessness, subtle agitation, a flickering at the edge of awareness. Here we must distinguish, because the same word appears elsewhere in the canon. The fourth of the 5 hindrances to meditation is uddhaka kukuka, restlessness and remorse. And that is a coarser obstacle present in ordinary mind. The ninth fetter is something subtler, a residual unsteadiness that persists even when the gross hindrances have long since fallen quiet. It is uprooted at arahantship. The 10th, avijja, ignorance, the first link of dependent origination, the root condition that makes the whole cycle possible, the not knowing at the deepest non-conceptual level of the 4 noble truths. You have encountered this before in the discussion of dependent origination, in the description of dukkha, in the teaching of the 3 characteristics. Ignorance is what falls last. When it falls, the whole structure falls. The arahant remains. That is the map. 10 fetters, 5 lower, 5 higher. Stream entry cuts 3. Once returning weakens 2 more. Non-return cuts all 5 lower. Arahantship cuts all 10. The fetters are not a checklist. You cannot decide to cut Sakkāyadiṭṭhi tonight and have it done. The fetters describe what the path has done, what the practice has produced. They are diagnostic categories. They are not goals. Now, let us focus, as we said we would, on the first stage. Because the Buddha said this stage was the threshold, the moment after which the path becomes irreversible. The first time something falls away that does not return. Chapter 3. In the Samyutta Nikāya, in the 55th chapter, the chapter on the factors of stream entry, the Buddha returns again and again to a specific question. What are the conditions that make a stream enterer? What does the practitioner who has crossed this threshold actually have in their life that the practitioner who has not yet crossed does not? He names 4 factors. SN 55.1. First, verified confidence in the Buddha. The conviction, grounded in direct seeing, that the Buddha was a teacher who had himself crossed where he points others to cross, that the teacher knew the territory. that the example is not invented or imagined but real. Second, verified confidence in the Dhamma, the same confidence directed at the teaching itself. The conviction that the path described is the path that actually leads where it says it leads, that the analysis of suffering is accurate, that the diagnosis is correct, that the medicine works. Third, verified confidence in the Sangha, the community of those who have practiced and reached the stages, historically, in the canonical record, and across the centuries since. The confirmation that the path has been walked by others, that arrival is not a one-time event in a remote past, that the lineage of practice is real and continuing. Fourth, ethical virtue, Aryakanta Sala, virtue that is pleasing to the noble ones, not merely external observance, not the performance of rules, the settled inner orientation that no longer wants to harm, the mind that has, at its root, ceased to find harming attractive. This is not the same as keeping precepts because one is told to. It is keeping them because, at some deep level, one no longer wants anything else. The crucial word, across all four factors, is verified. In Pali, avikapasada. Not confidence based on hearsay, not confidence based on conjecture, not the kind of confidence that comes from reading about Buddhism and being persuaded that it sounds reasonable. Verified confidence, in this technical canonical sense, means confidence grounded in direct seeing. The stream enterer is not someone who has decided to trust the Buddha. The stream enterer is someone who has seen, directly, even if only briefly, even if only once, what the Buddha was pointing to. And once that seeing has occurred, doubt about the path is no longer possible. Not because it has been argued away, because it has been dissolved. Bhikkhu Bodhi notes that these four factors are described as conditions any committed lay practitioner can develop. The path was not designed for monastics only. The Buddha was emphatic about this. The conditions are trainable. The threshold is reachable. To see what this looks like in actual lives, in the canon, we should look at some of the names, because the canon names them. The Buddha did not speak of stream entry as an abstraction. He spoke of specific people, by name. Consider Anathapindika, the great patron, the householder who built the Jeta Grove Monastery, one of the wealthiest merchants in Savatthi. In the 143rd discourse of the Majjhima Nikaya, M.N. 143, Anathapindika is on his deathbed. He sends a message asking for Sariputta to come. Sariputta and Ananda arrive. They find him in great pain. Sariputta gives him a teaching, but it is not a teaching to comfort him in dying. It is something else, a careful, sustained instruction, drawn from the deepest of the Buddha's analyses of clinging, on not taking the six sense bases as mine, not taking the elements as mine, not taking the aggregates as mine, not taking the entire structure of experience as belonging to a self that could be threatened by death. A teaching designed for a mind ready to release everything it has held onto. Given at the threshold of death to a layman, Anathapindika weeps as he listens. The canon records this. He has been the Buddha's chief lay patron for decades, and he says he has never heard such a teaching given to lay people before. He asks why. Sariputta answers with characteristic restraint that such teachings are not customarily given to those who wear white. Anathapindika replies, "Give such teachings to them. Some will understand." It is one of the quietest revolutions in the canon. A dying merchant, weeping with the recognition that the deepest teaching has been kept from lay people by custom, asks for that custom to change. And in the centuries since, in many lineages it has. He dies shortly after this exchange. The canon records that he was reborn in the Tusita heaven, a destination consistent with the stages of the path. Consider Sita, the householder. In the 41st chapter of the Samyutta Nikaya, SN 41, there is a whole collection of discourses about him. The Buddha called him foremost among lay disciples in expounding the Dhamma, a lay practitioner whose understanding was so refined that he could explain subtle points of doctrine in ways that drew respect from senior monks. A stream enterer, a non-returner by some accounts, a householder, consider Dagavu, a young layman who, in the 55th chapter, in the third discourse, SN 55.3, receives a single teaching on his deathbed from the Buddha himself, a teaching on the conditions of stream entry applied directly to his dying mind. He dies a stream enterer. Some readings have him advancing further still. And consider Sarakani, or, in the Sujato translation, Saranani, the same person. The spelling varies between translators. His story is the one that, for many modern readers, is the most striking of all. In the 24th and 25th discourses of the 55th chapter, SN 55.24 to 25, the Buddha announces that Sarakani has died a stream enterer. The reaction in the village is immediate. The other Sakyans are scandalized. How could Sarakani have been a stream enterer? He was a drinker. He could not even keep the 5 precepts consistently. He certainly could not have been a stream enterer. The Buddha is asked. And the Buddha says, with a kind of patient precision, Sarakani undertook the training at the time of his death. He took up the path. He developed verified confidence. He oriented himself even in his final hours toward the threshold, and he crossed it. The point is not that you can drink your way to stream entry. The point is that the canon refuses to let stream entry be a matter of moral perfection or social respectability. It is a matter of inner orientation, of the 4 factors, of what the practitioner has actually developed in themselves, regardless of how their life looked from the outside. The Sarakani stories are paired in the canon. First, SN 55.24, then SN 55.25, with the same essential exchange and an even sharper insistence from the Buddha in the second telling. The canon, in other words, doubles down. Sarakani's case is not buried or apologized for. It is told, and then it is told again, with the same conclusion. The stream enterer is identified by the conditions that have been developed inwardly, not by the perfection of the outward life. The fact that the early community preserved both versions side by side tells us something about how seriously they took the principle the Buddha was establishing. Now, what actually happens at the moment of stream entry? The canon uses a specific phrase, Dhammakaku, the Dhamma eye, the eye that sees the Dhamma, and it uses a specific formula to describe what that eye sees in the moment it arises. Virajam vitamalam, dhammakakum udapadi, yam kinchi samudayadamam sabbam, tam nirodhadamanti. In Thanisaro, Bhikkhu's translation, the dustless, stainless Dhamma eye arose. Whatever is subject to origination is all subject to cessation. This formula appears throughout the canon. At the first teaching, after the Buddha gave the discourse on the turning of the wheel, SN 56.11, the elder Kondanya was the first to attain it. The Dhammakaku arose in him. The Buddha exclaimed, Kondanya has known. Kondanya has known. Later, in the Vinaya, at the gathering at Yasa's father's house, Yasa's family attained it. Later, the rich Brahmin Upali, in the 56th discourse of the Majjhima Nikaya, MN 56. Later, Sariputta himself, in the records of the Vinaya. attained it after hearing a single short verse from the monk Assaji. Later, Pokarasati, Kutadanta, Dharganaka. The list runs across the entire canon. Laypeople and monastics, Brahmins and householders, each one a specific person named in a specific moment with the same canonical description. What did they see in that moment? This is where modern readers most often go astray. The Dhammakaku is sometimes imagined as a kind of mystical vision, a flash of cosmic light, an experience of merging, an emotional epiphany. The canon does not describe it that way. The canon describes the content of the Dhammakaku with a single phrase: whatever arises, ceases. Direct seeing, not vision, not feeling. The arising, in the mind, of right view at a non-conceptual level. The seeing of impermanence, of the conditioned nature of every arising, with such clarity that doubt about the path is no longer possible. The doubt fetter, Vicikicchā, falls. It does not return. The canon describes a datable moment, a specific event that occurs in time. But what it describes is not a vision or a feeling. It is the arising of a direct seeing. Whatever is subject to origination is all subject to cessation. And once that seeing has occurred, the practitioner is, in a precise technical sense, a different being. Their trajectory is irreversibly altered. What does it mean to call it irreversible? The Buddha was specific. He said, "The stream enterer is nyato sambodhiparayano, fixed in destiny with awakening as destination. They will not be reborn in the lower realms. The path, once entered, cannot be exited." This is one of the boldest claims in the canon. The Buddha is saying that a particular event, occurring in a particular life, sometimes in a single moment, changes the trajectory of a being in a way that subsequent choices cannot undo. The fetters that have fallen do not re-arise, even if the practitioner falls into difficulty afterwards, even if their conduct in subsequent years is uneven, even if they appear from the outside to have lost the path. The internal change has occurred, the seeing has happened, the view has dropped, and what was seen cannot be unseen. This is why the Sarakani story is included in the canon. It is a stress test of the doctrine of irreversibility. Even a man whose external conduct was visibly imperfect, who could not even keep the 5 precepts cleanly, can have crossed, because what counts is not the external pattern. What counts is the internal event, and the internal event, once it has happened, holds. And here, exactly here, we need to be careful about a phrase that is often repeated and almost as often misstated. It is sometimes said that a stream enterer will reach full liberation within 7 lifetimes. This is partly right and significantly wrong. In the 3rd chapter, the 86th discourse of the Anguttara Nikāya, AN 3.86, the Buddha distinguishes 3 subtypes of stream enterer. Satipaṭṭhāna, the 7 times at most. For this stream enterer, the journey from stream entry to arahantship will take at most 7 more lives among devas and humans. Kolankola, the family to family. For this one, 2 or 3 more lives. Ekabe, the one-seeder. For this one, 1 more human life only. So the figure of 7 is a ceiling, not a sentence, not a universal. The path is shorter for some than for others, depending on how thoroughly the conditions have been developed before stream entry occurred. At most 7 for some, 2 or 3 for others, 1 more for others still. The variability is canonical. What does not vary is the irreversibility. Whichever subtype the stream enterer turns out to be, the path no longer goes backward. This is not a small thing. The Buddha called it a treasure greater than sovereignty over the entire earth. The Buddha called it the entry into the noble lineage. The Buddha said that the stream enterer has, in their possession, something that no possession can equal. And yet, and this is the point we will return to in the close, the Buddha was also extraordinarily careful about how he spoke of it to those who had not yet crossed it. He did not encourage practitioners to seek confirmation. He did not give them tests by which to verify their own attainments. He said, practice, develop the conditions. The result is what the conditions produce. The seeing is what the conditions produce. The threshold is what the conditions produce. You cannot reach across the threshold from the wrong side and pull yourself across. You can only stand in the work and let the work do what work does. Close. In the 10th chapter, the 61st discourse of the Anguttara Nikāya, the Avijja Sutta, AN 10.61, the Buddha offers an image that, more than any other, captures how the path actually moves. Imagine rain falling on a mountain. The rain does not fall everywhere equally. It collects in small hollows. The hollows fill, and water begins to trickle into runnels. The runnels fill, and water begins to flow into streams. The streams fill, and water begins to flow into rivers. The rivers fill, and water flows eventually into the ocean. No drop of rain ever set out to reach the ocean. No drop of rain ever aimed at the ocean. The ocean is what the falling and flowing produces. The water arrives at the ocean because the upstream conditions are what they are. The Buddha then names the upstream conditions of awakening in the same way. Association with people of integrity, he says, feeds the hearing of the true Dhamma. The hearing of the true Dhamma feeds conviction. Conviction feeds appropriate attention. Appropriate attention feeds mindfulness and alertness. Mindfulness and alertness feed restraint of the senses. Restraint of the senses feeds the three forms of right conduct: in body, in speech, in mind. The three forms of right conduct feed the four establishings of mindfulness. The four establishings of mindfulness feed the 7 factors of awakening. The 7 factors of awakening feed clear knowing and release. Liberation, the Buddha says, emerges from upstream practice. You cannot produce it by wishing for it. You cannot reach it by aiming at it. You can only produce the conditions that, when sufficiently developed, produce it. This is the canonical answer to the question of how the path actually works. It is not a path of acquisition. It is a path of cultivation. And the stages, stream entry, once returning, non-return, arahantship, describe what cultivation has produced, not what the self has achieved. There is another image. It comes in 2 suttas. The 71st discourse of the 7th chapter of the Anguttara Nikāya, A. N 7.71, and the 101st discourse of the 22nd chapter of the Samyutta Nikāya, SN 22.101. In both, the Buddha uses the same simile. A carpenter, he says, holds the handle of his adze every day. The handle is worn by his hands. Over time, the finger grooves wear into the wood. The carpenter does not notice the grooves forming. Day to day, the wood looks the same. But one day, perhaps after months, perhaps after years, the carpenter looks down and sees the grooves are there. The wood has worn. The shape of his hand is permanently impressed on the tool. A practitioner, the Buddha says, does not make the fetters weaken by wishing they would fall. They practice. The result is imperceptible day to day, like the finger grooves worn into the adze handle. You cannot see them forming. One day, you notice they are there. Development produces the result. Wishing does not. This is why the Buddha was so careful with how he spoke about the stages to those who had not yet reached them. because the moment you begin to ask, "Have I reached stream entry?" the moment you begin to scan your experience for evidence that you have crossed a threshold, you have already smuggled in something the path is designed to dissolve. You have placed a self in the center of the practice, a self that wants to acquire, a self that wants to verify, a self that wants to be a someone who has attained something. There is a phrase that has crept into modern Buddhist discourse, especially in the West, and the Buddha would not have used it. Certified stream enterer. The phrase implies that there are people who can examine you, run you through some assessment, and stamp your card. There are not. Thanissaro Bhikkhu has written, with some asperity, about the proliferation of teachers and schools that define stream entry in such different terms that the question becomes whose certification is valid at all. His counsel, the counsel of a senior monastic in a lineage that has produced many awakened practitioners, is to maintain heedfulness, to develop reliable internal standards, to do the work, to not seek certification. The safest course, he says, is heedfulness. What does this mean practically for you? It means do not track your stage. Do not scan your experience for evidence of attainment. Do not measure your progress against the canonical descriptions of the stream enterer's life. The self that tracks is the same self that the path is designed to release. To track is to feed precisely the structure the practice is meant to dissolve. Instead, practice. Develop verified confidence by reading the suttas, by reflecting carefully on what they say, by testing what they say against your own experience until conviction grows from the inside out, not the outside in. Maintain ethical virtue by examining again and again the orientation of your conduct in body, speech, and mind. Train in the 4 establishings of mindfulness by sitting, by walking, by paying close attention to what is here in this moment, by watching what arises and what passes. Sit with your breath. Watch what arises. Watch what passes. When the mind wanders, return. When the body grows uncomfortable, observe. When difficult feelings come, allow them. When pleasant feelings come, do not grasp them. Continue. The continuing is the practice. The continuing is what produces the change. The continuing is what the carpenter is doing day after day when he holds his adze and does not notice the grooves forming. Develop association with people of integrity. By seeking out the company of those who take this path seriously, whether in person or through the canonical record. Read the suttas. The Buddha said his teaching was for those who can hear it, and the suttas are how. Across the centuries, his voice has reached the present. Hear them. Sit with what they say. Let them, over time, reshape what you take to be the structure of your life. Be patient. The path the Buddha described is not measured in weeks. It is not measured in retreats. It is measured in the slow, steady reshaping of the conditions of your mind over years, perhaps over a lifetime. The carpenter does not finish wearing the adze handle by trying harder. He finishes by continuing to hold the adze day after day in the work that asks to be done. Cultivate the conditions the Buddha named. Let them deepen. Let them work on you the way the carpenter's hand works on the handle of the adze. Imperceptibly, daily, until one day the grooves are there. The stages will describe what has happened. They will not describe what you have achieved. And the difference between those 2 ways of saying the same thing is the entire difference between a path that goes somewhere and a path that goes nowhere. You have, in earlier videos in this catalogue, encountered the diagnosis, dukkha. You have encountered the destination, nibbana. You have encountered the practice, satipaṭṭhāna. Tonight you have encountered the waypoints, the map between the practice and the destination, the shape of the territory you actually walk through, If you walk, the map is not the practice. Knowing the map does not move you across the territory. Only walking moves you. The Buddha, asked again and again to describe what the stream enterer sees in the moment of seeing, used the same formula. Across discourse after discourse, across decades of teaching, across the entire body of the canon, he returned to it as if it were the most precise thing that could be said. Whatever is subject to origination is all subject to cessation.